Hello, this is Mary with Design and Be Mary, and today I'm going to cover issues of cutting and cutting tips. I've seen a lot of people question what kind of scissors should they be using with wool, what scissors work well, or they have trouble, they have evidence of trouble getting nice even cuts, cutting into corners. All those types of things. So I'll go over a little bit of my cutting experience, and you can take what you need, and hopefully you'll find something that works for you. I have some scissors laid out here. This is my handy dandy kind of use it all scissors. I don't typically use this for a lot of wool cutting, but in a pinch I can cut a nice straight line. It's nice because it's a squeeze tip, which is for if anybody has trouble with their hands. This is very nice. It's also nice for those of us, I have very small hands. I've got kid-sized hands, and I have a hard time with scissors with full handles, this type of area, because I can't fit in. I either can fit in all my fingers and then they're crammed in, and 3 is not enough. And obviously this will come into play for all of you to find a scissors that's comfortable for your hand and to reduce fatigue, especially some of you that have issues like osteoarthritis or overuse of hands. Anyways, but I don't use this to cut a lot of wool. Maybe a big piece, I might do that. And I should say before I forget that a rotary cutter can also be used for large pieces of wool to cut edges if they're straight edges. This is a small kind of embroidery scissors, and it works well to trim threads. I don't tend to use these for wool. They could be used to clip a small piece in an emergency. The problem is that most wool over time, the tips are just not designed to deal with the amount of cutting wool, and over time the tips just don't close and cut all the way to the edge. With cotton, that doesn't seem to be an issue, but with wool, it does. But these are my, if you're clipping threads, these are absolutely great. Got a nice little shield, and I put these in all my project bags. I'm a scissors collector. The next ones is I have a Gingers, and a Ginger is a very good company. A lot of people don't like them because they're heavy. I like the weight. This is about a 6-inch shears, and what I like about this one is I can always count on it to cut to the edge. And that's partly due to the weight of the scissors. It's nice and strong. It's not a thin tip that gets bent out of shape. It is not a serrated scissors, but I really do like doing this. The only thing I can complain about this is if I have to do a lot of cutting. As you see, I can either try and fit in 3 fingers or 2, and sometimes if I'm doing a whole afternoon of cutting, my hand will get sore from it. But otherwise, I really like the scissors for cutting. I can always rely on it going to the edge. The other 2 are more contemporary scissors that are being used today. This one is, I believe, by Havel. And by the way, I am not associated with any of these companies. I'm not paid or have any affiliation that way with them. It has a nice little cover. It's a very lightweight scissors, which is good for people with hand problems. And this one does have a serrated edge. And I like these just fine. I've used them. One I've had longer than the other, and it is starting to not quite clip to the edge all the time unless I'm using a very firm wool. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. And I'll show you on the other scissors. This is a serrated edge, and it's probably hard to see, but one of the edges here, if you feel it, has a serration, and that is important because it keeps the fabric from slipping away from you. At one time, the big deal was to have a serrated scissors if you worked with silk. Obviously, it also helps with wool and keeps the cutting where you want it. There's no slipping. The latest one that I have gotten and that I really like, because again, it's a little bit heavier, and I find when they are very heavier built, they tend to last longer. This is, I believe, the Karen K. Buckley scissors. I believe it's got her name there. And it is also a serrated edge. And let me see if I can get this so that you can see the serrated edge. Hopefully you can see the little serrations along the edge here. And again, I have been very pleased with this scissors. Finds that it clips all the way to the very edge of something. And if I just show you roughly, picked out something black. I'll turn it over. Well, maybe I'll get something light here. And it just it clips right into that tip, and you can clip from the other side right into that tip. So that's a nice scissors. These come in a small size. I have not tried the small size, and they come in a larger size. Some people use them for all their purposes. There are other scissors available, and you certainly should try them. If you have a friend, it's nice to be able to try and feel it and get some heft before you invest in it. Once you have it, just make sure it doesn't fall on the floor, and you will have a scissors for a long time if you take care of it. The other thing that we want to cover about is to use an appropriate size to the wool. If you're using a lot of heavy wools, again, a little thin scissors is going to eventually get kind of torqued out of shape. Excuse me. And how do you know when you're working with wool? There's different weights of wool, and I have some here. This is a Melton weight wool, and let's see if I can get it here to hopefully get close up. You can see how thick it is. It's a coat weight. This one is also a little heavier, and I have some fusible on the back of this one, and I'll explain to you about that. This is quite often the type of wool that you find in your local quilt shop that's sold in small 9x12 sizes, and they've been hand dyed, and it's a softer wool. It's not particularly thick, it's not particularly thin, but it doesn't have a lot of body quite often because it's been washed and felted. And this is a piece of, this is a very thin shirt weight Pendleton wool, and that is quite thin. And I use all of these in my wool work, and having a scissors the right size makes a difference. What does softness have to do with it? If you have a firmer fabric, you will be able to cut cleaner lines. If you're just trying to cut a soft piece of fabric, you kind of have to support it. Here it is. And you can certainly do that, but it gets to be a bit of a challenge to always keep it where you can do it. Whereas a firmer one is going to be a little easier to hold on to. You don't have to quite support it as much with your other fingers. Now, a few other things that will help your cutting greatly is using freezer paper. I have an example here, and what freezer paper does, it'll give your fabric body, and it'll make it easier for you to get an accurate cut. If you want to trace your design on freezer paper, iron it on either side of your fabric, whatever you're using, and simply cut into it. Now notice that when I cut, I go into the throat of the scissors. I don't cut out here and make short cuts. Go into the throat, cut, and then hanging on, move the scissors up to the throat, and you'll get a nice clean cut. Oh, there it is. Sorry about that. Let's try that again. I may have missed it. But you start with the throat of your knife or your scissors, cut forward. You don't have to go to the tip. You just slide it up and push that fabric in and trim it off. And you'll get a nice clean cut. And obviously you can remove the freezer paper. There's no harm to your piece. That also works for fusible. So this piece has fusible on it. If I want to just cut a straight piece, I can cut a piece off. Obviously, the only thing with fusible is you're going to have to keep in mind. You can also cut without the paper on the fusible if you're afraid that the paper is going to have an effect on your scissors. I've read mixed reviews about whether or not today's scissors are as susceptible to wear and tear with paper as others. I've heard different opinions on that. Generally, I don't mix mine up, but I'm also not panicking if I happen to cut out some pieces with fusible and paper backing on them. Now, the other thing that we want to talk about is like something soft like this. Obviously, again, putting freezer paper on it or fusible will help tremendously. If you don't want fusible on your piece, you can put the fusible on, but before you put it on, trace your shape, but then what you do is cut out the inside of the shape, leaving just the outer edge, and iron that to your piece. That way you will not have the fusible in the center area, but you'll have it on the very edges where it'll help keep your edges nice and crisp and cleaned, and it'll also be easier to cut. Now, a few things about cutting. This would seem very elementary, but I found as an art teacher, I witnessed many high school students who really did not understand how to cut with a scissors. There are some principles. One, always cut into a corner. Don't try, this is not what you want to do. You don't want to cut to the edge and then cut in like so, and then try and twist your piece to cut out. That's not what you want to do. You want to cut into that corner piece. And this is why you want a nice sharp, because you can get it real close. If there's a little thread left, you can trim it. Let me do that again. You cut into the piece. You don't turn it out. You always cut into the corners, and when your tip is very sharp, you'll be able to go right in and have a nice cut, very crisp and very clean cut. So always, rule number one, always cut into it. The second one is that you want to, this is a little hard to describe. When you are cutting, when you're cutting a circle, don't cut in like this and try and turn it. Anytime you try and turn it, you're torquing the fabric out of shape, even if you're cutting on the line. Start and cut at a gradual angle. And what you want to do is with your hand that's holding the fabric, you want to move that piece into the throat of your scissors. You don't want to take short, you don't want to do this. You don't want to snip this and then snip this and then move. You're going to get some choppy edges that way. But if you kind of push this into the throat, keep rotating the piece. I don't have to stop with my scissors. I can readjust my left hand, and I can go quite a ways around, and you will get a nice, at the time, go back to your throat. If you open up your scissors, just keep going to the throat, and you want to keep cutting around, and when you get back, you should be able to go, and you'll have a very nice cut circle. I have the freezer paper on the back, and there you go. Obviously, many of you have cutting machines, and those are very nice machines to have. However, they're somewhat of a luxury because they're not cheap, and you're also confined to the sizes that the dies have. And I know I have looked into, there are some now that where you can draw your own. I've just found that by working a little bit and practicing with your cutting, you can get further again. So once more, when you're working with fabric, I'll use this piece because it's got, well, I can use this piece here. Let me try this. Again, put it into the throat of your scissors. The serrated edge will help hold it. And you can twist back and forth. But you want to just keep pushing, pulling that thread, pushing it into the area. And you'll understand the difference that this makes rather than making short, choppy cuts. And you can obviously go all the way. And remember that if you have to go into a corner, not to turn this to go out. You're distorting that piece. Obviously, sometimes there's just some pieces you're going to have to figure out how to cut. Once in a while, there's a very complicated piece. But you want to be able to go back in like so, clip to the edge, and clip to the edge. And you can see exactly where you're going if you use freezer paper. So hopefully these things will help you a little bit with your cutting and help give you a little bit more accuracy and smoothness on curved cuts and more accurate corners on sharp cuts. Anyways, hopefully you'll soon be cutting wonderful pieces and working with it. And I hope you have a good day and go have some fun stitching. And I hope this these hints have been helpful to you. Happy stitching!